Welcome, everyone. My name is Eva Lark. I'm the Senior Manager of Public Programs for the Hog Island, Audubon Camp, and Seabird Institute. Welcome to our Making Bird Connections lecture series, where we will bring a bird-focused presentation to you every month. These presentations are free, but donations are always encouraged, and they help fund our programs. The donation link I will drop in the chat box or the comment section, so check that out. Also, check out our other upcoming programs. We have our Turn the Page book club that is for sale now, launching in January. Makes it a great holiday gift. This week, I'm really proud to present two really fine gentlemen here. Scott Weidensaul is going to kick us off with a presentation tonight. Scott's the author of more than 24 books. His newest book is A World on the Wing, The Global Odyssey of Migratory Birds. Scott's also the program director of many camp sessions at Hog Island. Amazing naturalist, wonderful birder, bird researcher, bird bander, and I'm proud to call him a friend. Thanks, Scott, so much for joining us tonight. Always great to have you here.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, Eva, and I am very proud to call you a friend, too. All right, let me do the screen share shuffle. Give me a thumbs up if you got a title slide, Eva. Excellent. So it's pleasure, as always, to be doing anything remotely related to Hog Island, and that's particularly the case tonight. Real delight to do this with Eva and my good friend Jeff Wells, whom you're going to be hearing more from in a little bit. But let's talk about migration. It's it's mid-November, and for those of us here in the Northeast, the migration season is winding down. But the cool thing about migration is it goes on all the time, everywhere. There's not a month of the year that there isn't migration going somewhere. And I have been kind of obsessed about migration for most of my life. In fact, 50 years ago this fall, my life took a very dramatic turn when I took my first trip to Hawk Mountain Sanctuary in Pennsylvania on a spectacular fall migration day, and really got hooked on migration in a permanent way. It's become the sort of the defining passion of both my personal and professional life. 20-some years ago, I spent, during much of the 1990s, in fact, I spent years traveling up and down the Western Hemisphere following bird migration, basically from Alaska down to the southern tip of South America and back, in the course of working on a book called Living on the Wind about bird migration in the Americas. And I wrote that book very much as an outsider looking in. I do not have any kind of an academic degree in science or ornithology. I've always been fascinated by birds. I've been working on raptor rehab since the early 1980s. I got involved in bird banding in the late 80s, especially starting with raptors and working my way all the way down to hummingbirds. But when I wrote Living on the Wind, it was as a passionate amateur, sort of synthesizing what we knew about migration science and migration conservation challenges, but not somebody who was really directly involved in that research, other than the fact that I was doing a lot of bird banding. Now, in the 20-some years since then, a couple of things have changed. For one thing, we've learned an awful lot more about the science of migration. We've learned a lot more about the conservation challenges facing migratory birds, many of which we're going to talk about this evening. But my own involvement in bird migration and migration research has changed dramatically. I've become much more directly involved in a lot of the migration science, particularly involving a lot of the new tracking technologies. And so over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, I was back on the road again, working, as Eva said, on a new book about bird migration at a global scale called A World on the Wing, and exploring the recent advances in the science of migration, how birds orient and navigate, the kind of physiology that allows them to do these amazing things, and also the challenges for birds all around the world. By the way, if there's somebody has an unmuted microphone out there, it'd be really great if they muted that. That'd be helpful. So anyway, not to be a buzzkill right out of the gate here, but migratory birds are in crisis, and I don't think that's going to come as a surprise to anybody that's on this Zoom this evening. Most of you probably either read or heard about this blockbuster paper that came out 2 years ago by some of the top ornithologists in the country, documenting the fact that we've lost about 3 billion individual birds since I got hooked 50 years ago on bird watching. And I don't think I'm directly responsible for that, but about a third of North America's birds have disappeared. And, the reasons are multitude, from habitat loss to climate change to changing food resources to pesticides. The list goes on and on. But we know what the score is here. We know what we need to overcome. And here's the thing. While the situation can seem bleak, all around the world, conservationists are making positive changes for migratory birds. They're confronting the challenges facing migratory birds, and against pretty steep odds, in many places they're making progress. Sometimes in the most unexpected places, sometimes in the most critical places. For example, one of the places that my research for this new book took me was the Yellow Sea between China and the Korean Peninsula, which is easily one of the world's most important migratory stopover sites. The whole East Asia, Australasian flyway, which stretches from Oceania and New Zealand and Australia up through Eastern Asia and up into Eurasia and all the way into Alaska and the Yukon, this enormous transhemispheric migration pathway funnels down on the Yellow Sea. And every year, between 11 and 13 million migratory shorebirds stop off on the Yellow Sea during their migration to rest and to feed, along with about 100 million other migratory passerines and waterfowl and raptors. It is easily the most important of all the migratory stopover points in the Old World, and without question, the most endangered. The scale of the Yellow Sea is kind of hard to believe until you're actually there. When the tide goes out at a place like Chaozini here on the coast north of Shanghai, it goes out like 20 kilometers. And you look down at this rock-hard mud that looks completely featureless, but under the surface, it is a stew of macroinvertebrates on which these migratory birds, some of which have just flown 6,000 miles nonstop from Australia or New Zealand, on which they utterly and completely depend. The problem is that, particularly in China and South Korea, most of those tidal flats, those mudflats, have been destroyed. About 60 to 70% of the mudflats on the Chinese side, about 40% in South Korea. This is tidal flats that have been quote unquote reclaimed, where they've built enormous seawalls and pumped hundreds of millions of cubic meters of sediment in there to form dry land for industrial sites, for cities, or for deep water aquaculture ponds like these, which, shorebirds have short legs. They can't use these deep water ponds. And so we're down to, in the words of one conservationist, a birds per hectare equation, where for every acre of additional mudflat that disappears, birds die, because they've been squeezed into such little available habitat that there's just no room left. There's no wiggle room left. When South Korea built a 21-mile long seawall across, walled off the ocean from about 150 square miles of formerly rich tidal flat, on which about a quarter of the world's great knots depended, a quarter of the world's great knots disappeared because they had no other place to go. For most of us, if we've heard about the Yellow Sea, it's probably because of this bird. This is a spoon-billed sandpiper, the weirdest and most weirdly charismatic shorebird in the world, with that strange spatulate bill. Kind of looks like a semi-palmated sandpiper, about the same size, but there's only between 200 and 600 of them left on the planet. They breed in the Russian Far East, and they winter in Southeast Asia, and they depend utterly and completely on the Yellow Sea mudflats every year, twice a year in their migration, especially in the fall when they're in the process of molting their feathers, stopping off there for a number of weeks. Without the Yellow Sea mudflats, these birds disappear. And so do spotted greenshanks and bar-tailed and black-tailed godwits and great knots and a whole host of other birds that depend on them. Which is why conservationists like Jing Li, who founded a small nonprofit called Spoon-Billed Sandpiper in China, international conservationists like Dr. Tunis Piersma from the Netherlands, and many, many others, have been lobbying the Chinese and Korean governments for years to protect what little bit was left of the mudflats in the Yellow Sea. And when I went over there in the spring of 2018, I have to confess, I really thought this was going to be the most depressing chapter of the book that I was going to be writing, because it was really down to the 11th hour for these birds. Many of them, like spotted greenshanks and spoon-billed sandpipers, teetering right on the edge. And then an amazing thing happened. that just a few months before I arrived there, the Chinese government issued a sweeping ban on all further coastal reclamation, coastal destruction along the Yellow Sea mudflats on the Chinese side of the border. They nominated most of the most important shorebird sites for UNESCO World Heritage protection through the UN. Last year, they nominated another 600,000 acres of shorebird sites for UNESCO protection. And just this year, UNESCO protected some of the most important shorebird sites on the South Korean side of the Yellow Sea. So I found myself over there talking to scientists like Tunis and Zheng at a time when they were grappling with a very unfamiliar emotion, which was hope. And sometimes hope can be the most difficult thing to find in bird migration and migratory conservation. I mean, the challenges seem so enormous and so daunting that it's very easy to give into despair. And so it's nice to have stories that remind us that even the humblest people in some of the most remote places on this planet can do impressive things for migratory bird conservation. For example, one of the most remarkable stories I've ever had the privilege to report on was in the mountains of Nagaland in northeastern India. This is a little bit of India that sticks up between Myanmar, Burma to the south, and China to the north. It's remote, it's politically challenged, shall we say. It's been trying to break away from the rest of India since 1947. It's the site of the longest running guerrilla war in Asia that's been going on for 80 years. The people who live there, the Naga, until at least the middle of the 20th century, in some places as late as the 1980s, were headhunters, but Baptist headhunters, thanks to American missionaries that came in there in the 19th century. It is a remarkable place. But from an ornithological perspective, what makes it really an amazing place to visit are these Amur falcons. Amur falcons are about the size of American kestrels. They're largely insectivorous. And every year, millions of Amur falcons leaving their breeding grounds in northern China, Mongolia, Siberia, pass through this part of India to bulk up on termites. And in the wake of the monsoon rains in late October and early November, trillions and trillions of termites emerge from underground on their mating flights, these big, fat, juicy, presumably tasty termites that are the perfect food for insect-eating falcons that have a very, very long way to go. Because Amur falcons have the longest migration route of any raptor on Earth, about 18,000 miles a year, and the longest overwater crossing by far of any raptor, about 2,400 miles across the Indian Ocean, down through the Horn of Africa and into southern Africa, where they spend the winter. The problem is that when outsiders, and when I say outsiders, I mean conservationists from India and even within Nagaland, finally penetrated the remote central part of Nagaland near the village of Pangti to follow up on reports of enormous numbers of falcons, they discovered a slaughterhouse. They discovered that local villagers were killing about 140,000 of these falcons during the peak of the migration every year. Now, I want to stress, this was not a traditional subsistence hunt. This is not something that these people have been doing time out of mind. In fact, the falcons had only started gathering in really dense nighttime roosts of tens to hundreds of thousands of falcons in the previous 10 years or so, when the Indian government had built a huge hydroelectric dam along the Doyang River. We don't really know why the falcons began gathering in such numbers, but it made it easy for local farmers whose crops had been destroyed and their fields flooded by the dam to start stringing their fishing nets in the trees and catching these falcons and selling them for cash money that they used, frankly, most of them to pay for their kids' education. Well, that's all well and good, but 140,000 falcons every year is going to send this species tumbling toward extinction very, very quickly. And yet that didn't happen. Instead, a really remarkable thing happened, in part because of increased law enforcement, because this hunt was technically illegal, but the authorities have been turning a blind eye to it for a long time, but mostly because of a massive conservation effort and a genuine realization on the part of the Naga that what they were doing was threatening these birds. They stopped completely from one year to the next. 140,000 dead falcons one year, virtually none the next year. And the world went from condemning them for this barbaric slaughter to praising them for turning into ardent conservationists. Now, one of the reasons I have to say that they gave up falcon hunting so quickly in Nagaland was because they were told by conservationists with justification, this is one of the world's great wildlife spectacles. People are going to want to see this. People are going to want to come to see this. But here's the thing. Getting into Pang Ti, getting into that part of Nagaland is not for the faint of heart. That is an active landslide zone right there. They just, every time the mountain gives way and carries the road away with it, they just bulldoze another road right through there and just use it until the next landslide. And you just got to hope you're not the one on the road when the landslide goes. And I should also say that that slope continued down for about another 150 or 200 feet out of the frame of this picture. I don't think I've ever been quite as terrified driving on a road as I was driving through Nagaland. And not just because of the road conditions. I mean, we were told repeatedly, do not be on the road after dark because of the risk of armed bandits and cross-border insurgents, Maoist guerrillas coming in from Myanmar. In fact, there was a firefight between guerrillas and the Indian government just a few weeks before we got there, not all that far from where we were traveling. But it was worth the trip. In a lifetime of following some of the biggest raptor concentrations around the planet, I have never seen anything to compare to what I saw in the fall of 2017 when we went into Nagaland. To watch 50, 60, 100,000 falcons coming off their nighttime roosts at daybreak in numbers like this that just went on for hours. These great tornadoes of birds swirling up into the air in such numbers that in the pre-dawn darkness, before you can even see them, just hear the sound of, sounds like rushing water or wind blowing overhead, these great tornadoes of birds coming up. And this was just one of many roosts along the Doyang Reservoir. We could look up and down the valley and see great columns of birds rising from other roosts. There are places like Veracruz in eastern Mexico where 4.5 million raptors migrate through every fall, but there's nowhere else that we know of on Earth where you can see so many raptors in such a concentrated area for such a long period of time. These birds stage up there for several weeks. So hope is the thing that we want to try to find when it comes to migratory birds. And one of the things that gives me hope, that makes me cautiously optimistic, is that we have a lot more tools at our disposal right now for understanding migration. Migration is the most dangerous part of a bird's annual cycle, and it's the part of the annual cycle that we know the least about. But we're learning more, and we're learning more rapidly. One of the most important tools that we have is one that was not built for ornithology. I can guarantee you the National Weather Service did not design the Doppler weather radar system with bird watching in mind. But it turns out that all of those Doppler weather radar stations all across the lower 48 are superb at detecting nocturnal migration, which is when most birds migrate. And so not only can it tell you that there's a pile of birds flying over, as you can see right here, the Portland, Maine airport, and flying over Hog Island. It can also allow you to calculate almost exactly how many birds per cubic meter of airspace are up there. And so when we say that we've lost 3 billion birds over the last 50 years, a lot of that information, a lot of those data come from radar, because we've got archived weather radar images going back decades that essentially, now that we have enough computing power to crunch all of that data, essentially gives us a time machine. We can look back week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, and see how and where migration has changed over North America. Now, radar is great for telling you how many birds are up there, but it is, in the words of one radar ornithologist, it's taxonomically agnostic. It can't tell you what is up there. In order to know what's up there, you need other forms of big data. And what has rapidly grown into the most important of those big data databases is eBird. Every time one of us, uploads one of our checklists into eBird, we add to this astonishing database that's allowing us, as you can see right here, allowing scientists to model with astounding precision the abundance, presence, and movements of birds like yellow warblers at a level of detail that I think would have been incomprehensible even just 5 years ago. And it's also allowing us to take boots on the ground action for migratory birds. For example, out in the Central Valley of California a couple of years ago, scientists with the Nature Conservancy realized that they could take eBird data that tells them exactly what species of migratory shorebirds are passing through the Central Valley at just what time of the year. And they could combine that with high-resolution satellite imagery from NASA showing surface water conditions. And they could pay farmers, rice farmers in particular, relatively small amounts of money to flood their fields at just the right time, at just the right depth, for just long enough when these black-necked stilts and other migratory shorebirds are passing through, and create tens of thousands of acres of what they call pop-up wetlands, and do it for very, very little money. Buying agricultural land in the Central Valley of California is insanely expensive. Creating pop-up wetlands just when you need them for just long enough is a whole lot cheaper and just as effective for the birds. We're also learning about migration because there's an explosion in new tracking technology. And this is something that I've been directly involved in for the last 20 years or so. It's one of the most exciting things that I've ever been involved in. One of the projects I've been doing for about the last 8 years is called Project Snowstorm. And we're studying the winter movement ecology of snowy owls when they migrate down from the Arctic into southern Canada and the northern United States. And we're using high-tech GPS GSM transmitters that are basically using two technologies most of you have in your pocket right now. They communicate with the GPS satellite system overhead, and so they log these just bizarrely precise coordinates: latitude, longitude, altitude, flight speed, and as frequently as every 6 seconds. And then a couple of times a week, they dial up through the cell phone network using a cell phone modem and send us all that data. I like to joke that my friends are cooler than your friends because I get text messages from snowy owls. And by the way, if you are interested in learning more about Project Snowstorm or tracking any of the 92 owls that we've tagged over the last 8 years, just go to projectsnowstorm.org, and all the tracking data is there for you to take a look at. So that's great. You got this, transmitter the size of a matchbox that weighs 40 grams. You can put that easily on an owl that weighs 4.5 or 5 pounds, but try putting that on a Swainson's thrush. The Swainson's thrush is not going to migrate anywhere because the transmitter weighs more than it does. Until fairly recently, it was impossible to track small migratory birds, which is most migratory birds, across landscape or hemispheric distances because it just was too damn difficult. You had to follow the individual bird with a radio receiver. But now, thanks to a combination of highly miniaturized transmitters and a new generation of automated receiver stations, we're finally getting an almost second-to-second window into the lives of even the smallest migratory birds. I'm talking hummingbirds. In fact, I'm also talking migratory insects like monarch butterflies and migratory dragonflies that we can tag with these so-called nanotags. And this is all part of the MODIS wildlife tracking system, which is the brainchild of Birds Canada. And they realized that they could combine these highly miniaturized, like 1/250th of an ounce transmitters with automated receiver stations that look like somebody forgot to take down their old-fashioned TV antenna. There are now about 1,300 of these receiver stations around the world, primarily in the eastern United States, although that is changing rapidly. And a lot of those in the eastern United States were put up by a group that I helped found called the Northeast MODIS Collaboration. In fact, the MODIS receiver station out on Fish House at Hog Island is part of the Northeast MODIS Collaborations Network. We've got about 150 by the time we're done, about 150 stations we've put up in the Mid-Atlantic and New England, but there are regional projects like this popping up all over North America, down into Mexico, the Caribbean, Latin America, Europe, parts of Asia and Australia. And again, all the tracking data coming out of the MODIS network is publicly available. If you just go to www.modis, M-O-T-U-S, MODIS just means movement in Latin. If you're interested in common nighthawk migration, you can look up where common nighthawks are going. You can look at any of the more than 30,000 individual birds, bats, and bugs that have been tagged by MODIS. This is giving us the information that we need, maybe just in the nick of time, to figure out how to start to reverse the declines that we've been seeing in migratory birds. And while we've been learning more about what the birds do, we've also been learning a lot more about how the birds do it, the astounding things that migratory birds do, the feats of physical endurance that they perform every year. When I wrote Living on the Wind back in the late 90s, we thought Arctic terns like this one, like the ones that breed out on Eastern Egg Rock, were probably migrating 22,000 to 25,000 miles a year, which is impressive except that we now know that the Arctic terns that breed out on egg rock are flying somewhere between 57 and 61,000 miles a year. And some of them are spending the winter in the Indian Ocean. And even the tiniest little migrants like ruby-throated hummingbirds do astounding things. Ruby-throats, 600 miles nonstop across the Gulf of Mexico twice a year. That ain't bad for a bird that weighs 2.5 grams. But, even the smallest birds do astounding things. Little semi-palmated sandpiper like this one, common along the coast of Maine during spring and fall migration. This is a bird that breeds up in the eastern and central Canadian Arctic, that particular regional population, that has a 3,300-mile nonstop flight from the northeastern coast of North America out over the western Atlantic all the way to their wintering grounds on the northeastern coast of South America. That's the equivalent of a human being running 126 consecutive marathons and doing it without food or water or rest. I always, whenever I hear people comparing birds to human athletes, I get a little bit peeved for the sake of the bird, because the bird blows the human out of the water. The most elite human athlete is arguably a Tour de France cyclist in peak condition. This is somebody who's operating at about 4 or 5 times his base metabolism, and only able to do that for a relatively short period of time, less than a day, and only with regular hydration and regular food. Whereas that little semi-palmated sandpiper at rest has a higher metabolism than a human. It's about 104-degree body temperature. And when it's migrating, it's operating at 8 or 9 times its base metabolism. And it's doing that, as I said, for 4 or 5 days with no food or water or rest. But there is one similarity between what the semi-palms are doing and what the bicyclists are doing, because the semi-palms that are on this eastern Canadian population flyway, many of them stop off in the Bay of Fundy on their way south in the fall. Of course, in the Bay of Fundy, when the tide goes out, it exposes huge mudflats, not as big as the Yellow Sea, but pretty damn big. And in that mud, by the trillions, are tiny little crustaceans called corophium. And the semi-palmated sandpipers actually seek out and preferentially feed on the corophium. Now, there may be a couple of reasons why they do this. Maybe corophium tastes really good. I don't know. I haven't tried them. But we do know that corophium are really high in omega-3 fatty acids. And those fatty acids basically supercharge the aerobic capacity of the bird's muscles. So basically what these birds are doing is juicing on performance-enhancing drugs. The difference is what they're doing is legal. But the most amazing migrant of all, the land bird with the longest and most astonishing migration of any bird that we know of on the planet, is another shorebird. This is the Bartel Godwit, really elegant shorebird about the size of a small duck. And Bartel Godwits breed across Eurasia, but there's a population that has colonized across the Bering Strait and breeds in northern and western Alaska. And every year in late August and early September, these birds gather up along the Bristol Bay shore of the Alaskan Peninsula, and they feed on the tidal flats of great rivers like the Ikigik River flowing out of the Alaskan Peninsula. And they undergo a phenomenon that's fairly common among migratory birds. It's called hyperphagia. It's binge feeding. They just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat, so that in a matter of a couple of weeks, they more than double their weight. They are squishy in the hand like a water balloon. They jiggle when they walk. And in fact, they get so heavy that they have kind of a hard time getting in the air, which is a problem because they cannot walk where they're going. So what these birds do, having gained as much weight as they possibly can, they no longer need their digestive system, so they get rid of it. In a matter of just a couple of days, their stomach and their intestines, and to a lesser extent their kidney and their liver, shrink dramatically. They atrophy. At the same time that their digestive system is shrinking dramatically, their breast muscle mass increases by about 50%, and their heart muscle mass increases by 30 to 50%. They get ripped and buff without exercise. And you better believe that human physiologists are trying to figure out how they do that. And then they take off on the longest nonstop migration of any land bird that we know of. That's Alaska up there at the top. That's all of the expanse of the Pacific Ocean. These birds take off from Alaska. They fly right past the Hawaiian Islands. They overfly all the islands of French Polynesia and the Southern Pacific. They fly about 8,100 miles in the course of 7 to 11 days of nonstop flight, all the way to the North Island of New Zealand and the coast of Australia, where they land, regrow their guts, and start to eat again. Having spent the austral summer down there, in March or April, they undergo the whole process all over again. Gut shrink down, they balloon up in size, their gut shrink down, they take off, and they fly 6,000 miles nonstop from Australasia to the Yellow Sea, which we talked about before. They land, assuming they can find an undamaged mudflat. They feed, they balloon up in size again, their gut shrink down, and they make merely a 4,000-mile nonstop flight from there back up to Alaska. In all, this bird will have flown about 18,000 miles a year. It will be in the air for a total of about 22 days and will average about 820 miles a day in flight. A Bartel Godwit can live about 20 to 25 years, sometimes 30. By the time it dies, a Bartel Godwit flying this route will have flown the distance from here to the moon and most of the way back again. All of which is amazing enough, but we keep making discoveries about migratory birds that just stretch credulity to the breaking point. For example, this is an Alpine Swift. They breed in Central and Western Europe. And in 2013, scientists in Switzerland were curious about exactly where Alpine Swifts breeding in Switzerland went for the winter. They knew they went to Africa. They were curious about the exact route and the exact wintering area. So they captured a bunch of these birds. They put tiny little data loggers on their back that included a geolocator, so that when the bird came back the next year and they downloaded the data, they could find out where it went. And also a tiny little accelerometer that would tell them how much of the bird's day was spent flying and how much of the day was spent resting. They had that information for the breeding grounds. They wanted to get that for the wintering grounds as well. So they tag these birds, they send them off on their migration, they go down to Africa, they come back the next spring, scientists catch them, they download the data, they're very excited. They say, yes, look at that, the birds are flying down to the bulge of Western Africa. Isn't that exciting? Let's look at the accelerometer data. Holy crap, what happened here? Because it looked like the accelerometer data just flatlined. According to the accelerometer, these birds never stopped flying. Now, that's ridiculous. Except that's what they saw in bird after bird after bird after bird. Every single one of these Alpine Swifts, the accelerometers showed the same thing. And the scientists were eventually reluctantly forced to conclude that Alpine Swifts, for about 7 months from the time they leave the breeding grounds until they return the next year, do not land. They are in continuous flight. Now, swifts are insect eaters. They eat flying insects. They're so aerial that they even mate on the wing, unlike any other group of birds. If they could figure out a way to incubate an egg on the wing, they would probably do that as well. But this is not a fluke, because it turns out that common swifts, based on research done just a couple of years later in Sweden, common swifts spend 10 months of the year in continuous, constant, powered flight. And if that seems unbelievable, consider sooty terns. Sooty terns, which breed in the Caribbean and on small islands across the Pacific, when a young sooty tern leaves its nesting island, it does not return to land for 4.5 to 5 years. And because they are not waterproof, for that 4.5 to 5 years, they never land. They are in continuous flight, wandering across the Caribbean and the Pacific. How do they do this? Well, for one thing, birds are able to sleep with only half of their brain. It's what's known as unihemispheric sleep. They put one half of their brain to sleep at a time, back and forth, a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes at a time. They can do things that absolutely boggle the imagination. We have only just scratched the surface of what migratory birds are capable of. For example, we just recently learned that migratory birds are able to visualize the Earth's magnetic field by tapping into a form of quantum physics known as quantum entanglement that was so bizarre that Albert Einstein basically disowned it. We think this is science fiction. Birds have been doing this for millions of years. We've just scratched the surface of what migratory birds are capable of, what they can teach us, but only if we leave enough of this world undamaged for them. Part of the reason that I am such a supporter of the National Audubon Society is because Audubon has been fighting for migratory birds and migratory bird conservation for a very, very long time. And so I want to wrap things up on my end right now, because I'm really anxious to hear what my good friend Dr. Jeff Wells has to say about migratory bird conservation from the National Audubon perspective. So I'm going to stop screen sharing right now. And I'm also going to take a drink.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Scott, for sharing that wonderful presentation. If anyone out there has a question for Scott, we will be taking Q&A for both Scott and Jeff at the end tonight. So drop those down in the chat. Next, we have our Bird Connection presenter, Vice President of Boreal Conservation at National Audubon Society, Dr. Jeff Wells. Jeff's a researcher, author. He's also been a Hog Island instructor. Thanks, Jeff, so much for being here tonight and making that connection to other Audubon initiatives and programs.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That Scott, that was a fabulous presentation. I hadn't had a chance to see it yet. My wife saw it before I did for another thing you did, and it was as amazing as she told me it was. So, just thanks for that. That was amazing. Let me just do a quick screen share here. And is that working, Eva or Scott? Just can't see you, but
looks good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I just want to tell you about a few Audubon programs. Of course, Audubon, as all of you probably know, has a lot of programs working on trying to tackle this issue of the loss and decline of birds. And we have a growing program that's trying to scale up the efforts to the need that we now know is there. You know, Scott talked about how, you know, we know now that there's almost 3 billion birds lost since in the 1960s or 70s, and you know the scale of biodiversity loss, climate change. All of these things mean that we really have to ramp up our efforts, and Audubon's really got an exciting plan to do that, and a continuing plan. I'm going to tell you about some parts of it. One in particular that is particularly connected to the work that migratory bird work that Scott was talking about is the Migratory Bird Initiative, which is trying to take all of that new information that Scott talked about and putting it together in a new sort of atlas of bird migration information called the Bird Migration Explorer, then using that information to figure out what are the places that we most need to protect for certain species, different areas, what are the reasons why particular areas are important, to highlight those, and just to think about the whole hemispheric scale conservation. And, you know, this is the slide here kind of talks about some of the parts of the Migratory Bird Initiative, and you'll be hearing more about that in the coming months and years as more of that is coming online. You know, this is just a little graphic that the Migratory Bird Initiative produced on black-billed warblers, just sort of following 25 tagged individuals from the breeding grounds in the boreal forest down into the wintering grounds in South America, just to kind of give a sense. They're going to be doing more and more of that kind of work, putting together information in new ways to help learn more about what we need to do to protect these birds. Tied in with that is a renewed international effort of Audubon that's called Audubon Americas. And these are some of the countries that Audubon Americas will be, is already working in or will be working in. And you can see that they span the hemisphere. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the work that I focus on, which is in Canada, on the boreal forest region. And the boreal forest, if you don't know about it, is that green area at the top of the map. It's home to nearly 400 species of birds, 1 to 3 billion nesting birds that spill out across the hemisphere when you add the young of the year in the fall, 3 to 5 billion birds that become our familiar birds of migration in winter, all the way through the U.S., the Central America, the Caribbean, and South America. And so we, our focus mostly at this point in the boreal of Canada is around the largest land protection actions going on in the world today, which are being led by indigenous nations and communities. These are areas that are being proposed for protection in the billions of acres. One of the areas we're collaborating on right now is 12 billion acres, just as an example. So they are nesting grounds for literally millions and millions of birds in each one of these areas. So we have these 4 program areas working on communications. And just again to show some of the connections from the boreal. This is one of the birds from one of the eBird maps that Scott showed of the bufflehead, one of the most boreal of all the waterfowl of North America. Almost all of them breed in boreal forest, and they're of course arriving now across the Atlantic and Pacific coasts, and right here around Hog Island. The bufflehead have just arrived in the winter. So many of our lone birds as well have really important wintering concentrations in Central America and Northern South America and the Caribbean. This is a map just showing just for the province of Ontario some of the high priority songbirds where the greatest wintering concentrations are. The brighter orange is the areas where the most species overlap. Banding data, this is from the Hudson James Bay lowlands. It's showing primarily for waterfowl, all the banding returns from that area that the Migratory Bird Initiative actually prepared for me, just to show the connections between the Hudson James Bay lowlands of the boreal and all of the U.S. and Central America, Caribbean, and South America for a lot of waterfowl species. This is one of the more sophisticated maps Migratory Bird Initiative has produced that's still not completely public yet, looking at a subset of boreal land birds where they are in highest concentrations in the breeding season up in the boreal, and then in migration across the U.S., Mexico, Central America, and in winter in Central America and South America. So giving a sense of, if you were trying to protect the most important places for at least that subset of birds, where are the places we want to focus on? And that's just helping us to really make sure we're efficiently working on the conservation for the biggest gains. One of the greatest ways for people to engage in helping birds overall, Scott's already alluded to it with eBird, but there's a whole set of citizen science, what we call community science opportunities at Audubon, the Christmas bird count, which is coming up the 2 weeks that span the end of December and into early January. Anybody can participate. There are Christmas bird counts across, as you can see, really across much of the world, but centered in Canada, the U.S., and parts of the other parts of the Americas. And there's a way you can get online here at the Christmas bird count site and click on any of the sites and find out how to get involved if you don't know how to do that. Following right after the Christmas bird count, there's an opportunity to participate in something called Climate Watch. Very simple protocol where one can go out and just count even just a single species in a number of spots to help ground truth the models that are predicting whether birds will increase or decrease or disappear or appear in different parts of North America. And then another favorite that follows that in February, the Great Backyard Bird Count, which actually is a great way for us to assess the boreal birds that come down in the winter, and a very easy protocol over one weekend in mid-February. So these are a few of the community science opportunities here. If you're not familiar with them, take a screenshot of this with your iPhone to get to the websites, and some just very easy ways to participate. Finally, I just wanted to end on mentioning a couple other little things and use this as an opportunity to throw in a picture of Scott from a trip he went on with me up to the Northwest Territories quite a few years ago now. I can't quite remember how many, but with Pete and Linda Dunn and Mel White to kind of a tour of parts of the Northwest Territories. One of the other things that we're trying to work on more is to think about as we try to press for more conservation in more protected areas, and all over the world, including in the boreal, we're trying to think about ways to make opportunities for a sustainable economy for communities that may not have much other economic opportunity. If they have to choose between conservation in a mine or some other kind of industrial activity, that's a tough choice to make. But we want to try to show that there are other kinds of sustainable economies out there, and birding ecotourism is one segment of that we hope we can be helpful in trying to encourage. And one other thing, just I thought I'd mention quickly, is a lot of our efforts are with indigenous nations and with what are called indigenous guardians, which are stewards of the land, has been centered around trying to work with chapters and other parts of Audubon to provide things like binoculars and field guides. We have a program that's been adding more and more binoculars to Indigenous Guardians programs for this work all across the boreal of Canada. So I'll end there, but thanks for the opportunity to kind of show some of the Audubon connections, and I hope it leaves you hopeful in a similar way that Scott has described for programs that he's seen that give hope for the future of birds. And I just have this final thing. Again, if you want to take a screenshot of that, if you want to stay connected to learn more about some of the things I talked about, here's a little sheet of some of the websites that you can find some of this information on. And I'll stop there, and I'll stop the share.
Thanks so much, Jeff, for connecting to all those different programs across the Audubon network. I'm going to bring Scott and you back on here to open up for our Q&A. Let's see. Perfect. There's the three of us. So for those who have questions for Jeff or Scott, feel free to keep dropping those in the comment section chat box down below. There's a little bar. Click on chat and you can type in your questions. But we already have a good list, so we'll try to get through as many as we can before we wrap up tonight. Our first question is from Karen. The question is for you, Scott. Do you know what's behind the change in the Chinese, South Korean government stance on the preservation of the mudflats?
A couple of things. The Chinese government was getting a lot of pressure from the international community. They were also, I think, pivotal in this was what was called a blueprint for coastal conservation that was produced by the Paulson Institute. Hank Paulson, the former U.S. Treasury Secretary, who, with his wife Wendy, Wendy's been very involved with Audubon for years. They're big conservationists. They've been pushing the Chinese government to consider not just the conservation value of protecting those mudflats, but there are millions and millions and millions of Chinese citizens that depend on those mudflats for shellfishing and other economic drivers, and also for climate and coastal resiliency in the face of sea level rise. So I think there were a couple of reasons for that. It's been a little bit harder to get the South Koreans to focus on this, which is why the news that a number of the getbols, as the mudflats are called in South Korea, have gotten UNESCO protection recently was really, really welcome. So things have turned around in a significant way along the Yellow Sea. I mean, but really just at the last possible moment.
In a similar vein, we had a question for you, Jeff. How supportive is the Canadian government in conserving the boreal forests?
The federal government of Canada currently is very supportive, and they've put up the largest amounts of money in their federal budget for conservation overall and for Indigenous-led conservation in history. Their most recent budget, which they announced in August, had $340 million to support Indigenous conservation. So, really significant efforts there. A lot of the land use decisions, though, are made by provinces, and like U.S. states, provinces vary from one to the other as to how supportive they are. So some provinces are more supportive than others, and so it takes a bit more work, to go work. Each province is a little bit different in how they support it, and so takes a kind of a big coalition of of partners to help support and be allies of the indigenous people to move those forward. But but still, we've seen amazing things happen. Almost close to 200 million acres of new protected areas in the boreal in the last 20 years. So some of the largest land conservation happening in the world today is happening there.
Our next question, you talked about radar, MODIS, eBird. What technology is next?
It's going to be all about acoustics, and Jeff knows this well. He's been doing like nocturnal flight call stuff for a long time. But the hard part has been figuring out a way to categorize and quantify and identify all of those nocturnal flight calls that you can record with a little rooftop antenna or rooftop microphone rather, and something that Cornell's been working on for a number of years. Their BirdVox program, working with the NYU School of Music, but we're really close to having the ability to take huge amounts of acoustic data and aggregate it in a single place. Run it through AI and identify and quantify how many of each species are up there in the night sky, and kind of paint in the details on those taxonomically agnostic radar data. So I think in a lot of different ways, acoustic is the next frontier, and I'd love to hear Jeff's take on that as well.
Well, yeah, I agree on the acoustics, and we have a few projects with Cornell using some of their AI technology to survey birds in the boreal. But I also think the more the sort of miniaturization of some of these technologies, including the ones that are sort of using being able to beat back and forth to satellites going around the Earth so they can follow the birds even more tightly, will probably end up showing us even more fine scale kinds of movements that we're not able to detect so far with some of the technologies. Yeah.
Also, the Bird Genoscape project, where we're every time somebody catches a bird at a banding station, just pluck a feather, and the epithelial cells at the base of the feather can tell us, we look into the DNA and see how different regional populations in the breeding grounds correlate with regional populations in the wintering grounds and migration routes, and combining that with banding data and tracking data, and just getting a window into the complexities of these migrations that we didn't have a window on before. This is a really exciting time to be doing migration research.
I have a few questions about food sources, especially with all those birds you're highlighting with long distance migration. So Jedediah asks about, what do sooty terns eat when they're flying for 5 years?
Oh, well, they're seabirds, so they're feeding on zooplankton and fish and squid and things like that in the upper surface of plucking them off the surface of the ocean. They've got a constant buffet out there, so they're not going hungry out in the ocean.
And then Brenda wanted to ask about the Muir falcons. You're talking about that huge migration. Are they primarily insectivores? Do they have other food sources? What's bringing them in?
Right. So the big attraction in Nagaland and some of the surrounding areas, they're also found in like the neighboring state of Assam and other areas, are those termites, because the termites in that part of Asia are subterranean. They don't form those big mounds that you see in Africa or Australia. But at the end of the monsoon season, after the monsoon rains, they chew up to the surface and open up the tunnels. And that's when they have their mating flights. And so, trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of termites emerge in these great clouds and fly up into the air to mate. And that's when the falcons start picking them off. And when you see them feeding, you can actually see all these little sparkly wings dropping as the falcons are pulling the wings off before they eat the termites. So the timing of the falcons' migration and the fact that they're staging up there is all about this hyper abundant food resource for them. So, if things change in terms of termite abundance or the timing of the monsoons and the timing of their the mating flights of these alates, these fertile adults, that could be an issue for the falcons. But right now, it's just a banquet for them.
Our next question is, what species in North America is the most at risk for population decline right now?
Jeff, you want to take that one?
Well, I'm caught off guard a little bit. I guess I'm trying to think of the certain species like rusty blackbird's one that we know of that's declined like 90% or more. And we still sort of trying to piece together why. There are things like sage grouse and lesser prairie chicken out west that are kind of on the ropes from a combination of habitat change, climate change, and oil and gas work that's happening out there. There's probably lots of others that I'm trying to think. When I'm trying to think of like the upper level of the worst, but maybe Scott could.
Well, one that comes to mind is black rail. It's a species that, rails are so hard to study because they're so secretive, and black rails and yellow rails are the two most secretive of the secretive. And, black rails used to be relatively common in the salt marshes of the Atlantic seaboard, and they've just vanished. It's hard to find them. And fortunately, there's a real concerted effort right now, funding from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and a lot of state agencies along the Atlantic seaboard that are employing some of this new technology, like automated recording units, ARUs, to try to record the kiki-doo calls that they give, just to figure out, where they are, and in a kind of a last ditch attempt. But we don't really know what's happened. We think it may have something to do with sea level rise at the kind of mid-range, if I'm remembering this correctly, kind of the mid-range part of the marsh that these birds depend on are starting to flood out more and more frequently because of rising tides. But we don't really understand what's been going on with black rails.
There's also birds, like olive-sided flycatchers and Canada warblers and Connecticut warblers, all which have declined by 70+%. Evening grosbeaks, which have declined by 70+%, things like that. So, not to make everybody, feel there's enough of them out there to look at, and every region has its own birds that we need to be thinking about. And that's why one of the mantras of some of the leaders of Audubon is Audubon everywhere, because we realize that the problem is hemispheric in scale, and so we got to be ramping up our efforts to a whole nother level to take this on. And that's kind of what the Audubon Americas is trying to do, and all of our work across the U.S. as well.
Well, to end things on a high note, why don't you each tell us something you're hopeful for birds and their migration, and for folks out there listening, what's something, one easy suggestion that some people can do to make a difference?
One of the things I'm hopeful about is the way so many people got turned on to nature in general and birds in particular during the pandemic. I know all of us who've been working in bird conservation and birding for a while are kind of gobsmacked by how many people came into it. So there's just, and birds need all the friends they can get right now. One simple thing you can do, if you're a coffee drinker, buy bird-friendly coffee, which is Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center certified shade-grown coffee. I've seen with my own eyes what a difference it makes down in Latin America in terms of preserving and actually restoring and growing good migratory bird habitat down there.
Yeah, I would echo what Scott says about the growing number of people. In the pandemic, yes, but it's actually been growing for the last 2 decades. One of the fastest growing outdoor pursuits is bird watching and different forms of enjoying birds. So we have a growing set of people, that are interested, and we have had, more and more funding going from state governments and federal governments I mean, for the most part, we've had some ups and downs with different administrations, but for the most part, a growing trend of more and more interest. And so I think, we just all have to make sure our elected representatives know that we care. So along with doing the local thing, with sort of sustainable products like the coffee and other sorts of products that help birds that way in your own yard, don't forget that your vote makes a difference, a huge difference, because we need funding to make the big, large scale differences to protect more bird habitat and restore more bird habitat.
Well, thank you both for your presentations. All of you out there joining us, thanks for tuning in tonight. We're really able to provide these types of free programs because people like you donate. So I have the donation link in the chat. Feel free to give any amount. It will allow us to keep doing more programs like this and support Hog Island Audubon Camp. Next month, we have a special presentation by our head chef, Cleo Bell. She's going to present on cooking for the birds, how to start eating locally and sustainably. It's going to be a great night, and you should certainly tune in. The link to register for that is also in the chat. You can sign up now to join us, and then our Making Bird Connections series will kick off again in January, February. We'll have those registration links up later this week, so you can sign up for those in advance if you like. But I just want to say how thankful I am for all of you for joining us, for learning, and for Jeff and Scott, thank you for all of the information you provided, and really appreciate all the support out there for Hog Island. Thanks, everyone. Hope you have a good night.
Always a pleasure.